Welcome to Interview, a podcast for recruiters who are interested in thoughtful and practical discussions on issues, strategies, and disruptive technologies that are essentially impacting the staffing and recruitment industry. And our three experts are going to be first, John Geltema, who is our recruitment guru. He has over 20 years of experience representing high-level job seekers in their job search and negotiations. And John's going to bring the candidates and interviewees' perspective to the entire discussion. Our second expert is Mark Bassett, and he's going to be our executive search guru. He has over 25 years of experience hiring employees and contractors at, all different various levels of companies, ranging from startups to even Fortune 100 companies. And Mark is going to represent the clients in the hiring process, and he brings the employer's perspective to this discussion. And finally, our last expert is Debarshi Chowdhury, our technology guru with extensive experience building, reviewing, implementing recruitment tech, and even hiring hundreds of people to do it. Debarshi brings the tech employer's perspective to this discussion. And we'll also have invited guests contributing on their own specific topics of expertise in the future. So just go ahead and subscribe to the feed, and you'll be able to stay abreast of any upcoming topics and guests that we have on the show. In this episode, we will cover the essential tasks of actually taking the job order from clients and qualifying the legitimacy of doing the search. We have seen numerous experienced recruiters slip up on the basics, so here today we'll cover the must-dos and do-nots when getting the requirement from the hiring manager. Specifically, we'll focus on the steps that are important but often overlooked in the process. So, what line items are essential for the recruiter to get at the beginning? Travel requirements, remote work allowed, have must skills, immigration status, or any others. I thought we could kick it off with Mark. You want to kick it off with the employer's perspective?
Sure. I was raised in the pre-internet era by a management recruiters franchise, and they would not allow us to work with the employer's job description. So we had to start with a form and basically come away from that call understanding, what the job description is and what had to be accomplished. It was challenging, but I think it was helpful because it's very easy now to just take a list of specs and post them and go out and try and find that. So for instance, I might ask at the very beginning, before I'm even looking at a job description, what problem are you trying to solve with this hire, right? There's going to be a challenge internally. There's a reason they need to make this hire. There's something that's not being accomplished as a result of it. And I want to know what that is. What problem are they trying to solve? Because then it could also allow me to get to eventually different possible backgrounds where I might be able to collect the right skill sets from that person. The second thing I think that's super important is, we forget to ask why. Why should someone work there? Why would someone be interested? If I'm going to go into the passive market and try and generate interest and enthusiasm from somebody who's otherwise pretty reasonably happy in his position, I need to have something very saleable and appealing and compelling about both the company and what they do, as well as the job itself, to get a candidate excited. So, very often these job descriptions are written by an HR person who's talking HR and legalese and not really getting to the essence of the role. I need to be able to understand it and describe it without looking at a job description, a formal job description.
Absolutely, Mark. I agree with you. It's really important to understand the purpose behind the opening. The excitement points about the opening that are going to get somebody engaged, and of course the variations of the type of skill sets that would be successful in the role, or potentially successful in the role, including brainstorming with a hiring manager on alternatives they haven't necessarily thought of before. Like you, I started, a bit old school with, having to write my own job descriptions from scratch because it was either that or they fax it to us. And oftentimes it would be a conversation rather than a fax. And that allowed us to really dig deeper into the different elements of the job that's going to make help us determine what type of candidate is going to be successful in the role.
Yeah, and from my thing, it's really I'm the person doing the hiring, so it just tells me that the recruiter's digging deeper than the job description that was written up for the job. And obviously, this is something that we are very aware of, job descriptions do not capture everything. Because if you wanted to put everything down on paper, it would probably be a 10-page job description, and which nobody has the time to read anyway. So getting a conversation going with the recruiters where we can basically highlight the specific points that we're really looking for, and having the recruiter ask intelligent questions which would lead them in the right direction. That I think is a very critical part of the hiring process. If a recruiter doesn't do that, that really tells me that they're probably not going to be very successful at finding the right candidate. I mean, they might get lucky anyway and find somebody who fits. But in most cases, what I tell them, and which is what is not written on the job description, is what actually helps them screen the best candidates out.
Yeah, and like for instance, to get at the issue of the problem solving, I might ask, what, assuming someone is successful in this role, how are you going to be able to measure that? What are we going to see at month 3, at month 6, at year 1? What will have been accomplished, right? And it's very easy often then to work backwards from that, to be able to get into functionally what this person is going to be doing. And I hear John ask the question often to, describe an average day. Like that's not in the job description. The guy comes in, he takes off his coat, he has a cup of coffee, it's 8 o'clock. What does he do? And then what does he do after that? And what's the functional role look like in terms of just day-to-day interfacing with people and trying to get the job done?
I'd almost take a step back and ask the question: how do you take a job order? As possibly the kickoff question here, and quite frankly, how I take the job order is talk with the hiring manager. Certainly, if we have a prefab job description, we read it, we have a conversation with a hiring manager, and start just like Mark's talking about. What's the problem are you trying to solve? And that conversation will dictate a building of a relationship, a flow and a prioritization in the hiring manager's perspective, and our engagement with them. So when they talk about the priorities of the job and the requirements, and yes, a lot of those are listed, but then we look for the in-between details. That flow, that conversation back and forth, allows us to have a better, clear understanding of the hiring manager, which is going to be so pertinent to be able to paint a picture clearly for the candidates that we're screening, and of course gauge the personality type, not just of the hiring manager, but of the candidates to make sure there's enough alignment there of a potential, kind of chemistry match. So I really think you take it a step back. You start at the high level. It's solution selling, as they say. What's your pain point, and take it from there. And that dialogue is absolutely key to finding those in-betweener information that's going to allow us to be that much more effective in identifying and screening the right candidate. The beauty of it is as you're asking questions, you're getting the hiring manager to talk more and explain more details, and certain details that weren't in the job description will come out in that dialogue. And then at the end, or towards the end, you can come back with a synopsis. So what I understand is you're looking for da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and you use the exact hiring manager's words back with them so that they clearly understand, what you're talking about, and what they need. And that is a key element to this relationship building that's going to allow this to, the job order essentials to come together and allow us to be effective in a job search.
So more specifically, do you try to find out how long a position has been open for, whether it be 1 or 2 weeks versus 3 months, and how many offers have been made or turned down? What are the potential problems there?
Yeah, that's that to me, actually, I was taught to do that first before we even get into the details of the job, to screen out a circumstance where we might just be yet another person who's going to be throwing, spaghetti at a wall trying to get a job filled. If a position's been open for 6 months, if they've interviewed 30 people and haven't found anybody they like, if they have found people they liked and made offers and they've been turned down, what am I going to do magically different, except continue that problem, unless now, I have an opportunity to probe that and say, okay, so, you've made this many offers. Well, why were they turned down? Is it a financial issue? Was it an unrealistic expectation? If the job, I've even run into odd situations. Devarsi's talked about this before, where there's really no intent to hire, or the biggest huge red flag is when someone's been promoted and is replacing himself. I've got that right now with a client whose name I won't mention, where it's natural, like the person's been promoted. But he's not been able to find anybody as good as he is, and he'll go to the boss and say, "I've been trying for months, boss, but I just can't find anybody who can do it like I can do it." So why is the position open? How long has it been open? Have they extended offers? How many people have they interviewed? What resources have they used to interview people? I mean, I don't want to fish in a dirty or dead pool. If another recruiter has already been down this path and they've sourced every possible active job seeker resume, really, what am I going to do differently? So I need to know I've got different places to go, or if there's a problem here, begin to address it now and make it a more realistic position.
In addition, I'd ask them why they think it hasn't been filled. What's been the stumbling block? And maybe it's an internal thing, maybe it's a process thing, maybe it's a resource thing, maybe it's an expectations thing. Could be a variety of different things. The other piece to that, I'd ask them what sources, what companies specifically would they want to target, or what companies specifically they feel have the most alignable resources to their current environment and technology stack, or whatever the skills are.
Yeah, I think generally problem jobs are the ones that I think obviously for various reasons hang around the longest. And at some point, the hiring team, whether it's the hiring manager, the company, has to make a decision about how to relax the requirements around that job. Because if you haven't found somebody for 6 months, then there's something going on that's absolutely wrong for the position. And this is a separate discussion altogether. The company is actually losing money every day you don't hire a person. Once you've actually decided to hire a person, then you better do it quickly, because otherwise you're basically losing out on whatever benefits that person was going to bring in. And if you haven't done it for 6 months, you've basically done a really bad job. And that's not something that's really sustainable. So it's a discussion we need to have with the recruiters, where we basically have to figure out that middle ground at that point, and say, well, okay, it's not happened, but so why hasn't it happened, and what can change to actually make it happen? To Mark's point, just adding more bodies as recruiters is not really going to help if they keep doing the same thing. So something fundamentally has to change in either the job or the expectation for us to find somebody who would be a good fit.
I think that's a really good point, because keeping in mind, if we're recruiters going to get the easy layup jobs, they can fill the easy layup jobs themselves. They're going to come to us when it's difficult. So I'm not necessarily saying we need to walk away from a problem job. I think it's our job to solve the problem. And if we've got an amenable employer who understands that, yeah, this has been difficult, we don't understand why, and is willing to be forthcoming about those challenges, we might be able to amend the job description or the expectations or the compensation in some way that, okay, now we've got something workable. But they're always, I think for us, if they're going to pay us 20, 30, 40 grand for a hire, we're always going to get the more challenging ones, right? So it's a question of, making them challenging is fine. Realistic is necessary.
So as a recruiter, should you use, what sort of information do you need to actually help you decide whether a job is worth working on?
Yeah, so in addition to the job description itself and the history, which we've already talked about, the history of the position, I'm very interested in the process, their interview process, and the expectations therein, right? Because, candidates have a definite shelf life. And, if this is going to start out with an HR screen and a test, and then, a phone interview and then 2 meetings with the hiring manager, and then you come back and meet the whole team, and it's going to take 6 weeks or 8 weeks to do that, then we need to realize, are they realistic with the length of that process? How much of that can be tightened up or done concurrently? Maybe it's even necessary in some cases to be flexible, and that I'm not going to start off with HR or testing if I've got a passive candidate in the process. John's really good at backdating. I forgot what he calls it, the flow of from the start date goal of, say, April 1st, giving notice 2 weeks before that, meaning 2 weeks for extending offers and getting it closed, and then the length of your interview process. It's all about expectations and common ground. And if all the other pieces are there in terms of the job requirements and the experience and the compensation range, but I don't. The important message for me is I just don't trust a often HR generated job description, and if I can't speak to the hiring manager, at least in that early part of that process, to understand, there's other things, like Debarshi mentioned, things that really can't go into a job description. What are his pet peeves? What does he like and dislike about personalities and people? I'm not going to judge him. I'm just trying to understand it so that I can work with him. So people that have worked well there in the past, what organizations have they come from? Again, things that wouldn't be in the job description, but that are kind of natural. I also want the pain points to determine the urgency, because, what are the consequences of not hiring? What are the consequences of a bad hire? I'm probably, if this is a new client, I'm still going to have to qualify my fee, and I want some pain points to work with. When he comes back and argues about my fee percentage, I want to be able to reference that and say, wait a minute, I got the impression that without this guy, you're not going to have a product for next year to release, as of this date. That sounds like a pretty important role, right? So is everybody in? Has it, and we often forget minor things too. Has it been signed off? Is HR? Is there budget? Is there budget for a fee? Do you lose that in a certain period of time if it's not done by, say, the end of the year or the end of the quarter? All these things go into making that kind of decision.
To go along with that, Mark, I agree with you. I think one of the key things is really a mutual understanding between the recruiter and the client in regards to the terms of a working relationship, whether it's a contingency or retained or contract to hire or whatever it is. So I got to assume much of this conversation really is about that assumption's already been made. That agreement's already in place. And so we're really just taking the job order and what are the best practices for that. To go along with that, and something I alluded to earlier, it's really, the responsiveness with detail from whoever our relationship or our contact point is at the company. The detail being absolutely clear, again, on feedback, on whether it's for interviews, whether it's for submitted candidates, whether it's for specifics of the compensation through negotiation or whatever it is. And then, of course, that sense of urgency has to be there. If the company doesn't have that sense of urgency to fill this position, it may not be high priority enough for us to get the responsiveness and the detail on the candidates submitted. And so often you get that sense of urgency in the initial conversation, and then it trails off after, once you start presenting candidates, maybe it takes them a day or 2 or 3 to respond on, evaluate the candidate's resume and get a response. And especially in a market like this one where the economy, the unemployment is so low, resources are disappearing, too quickly for there to be a 3-day delay on a submitted candidate. We really need to get it ideally same day or within 24 hours. And of course, those will be telltale signs of once you initiated the search as to the legitimacy of continuing the search.
And here's something that I think gets really overlooked in this process. And I think every recruiter should absolutely ask this question whenever they're taking the job order. How many people are actually going to be part of the interview process? Basically, the moment that number crosses 1, if there's more than one person who has to make a decision, it just grows exponentially, the time frame for how long it's going to take to make the decision. And I've seen this with large organizations where there's a complete paralysis in hiring just because they don't want to make the decision if even one person out of a panel of 5 or 6 or even more, sometimes 10 people. If even one of them says no, then the person doesn't get hired. And then they wait 6 months because obviously it's very difficult to find the ideal candidate for 5 different personalities. So that's I think very critical in any process, any hiring process. If you have more than one decision maker, it just brings down the odds of a quick closing significantly.
Debarshi, you bring up a good point. One of the questions we tend to ask is, who is the final decision maker? Because we do assume, as a recruiter, I assume every person that our candidate meets through the interview process, whether it's a receptionist or a secretary or coordinator of some other type that you might not think has some sort of decision, they all have a decision, because they'll come back and say, yeah, this person didn't say, goodbye and thank you when they left. Maybe they just thought I was a secretary and a receptionist and I wasn't worth their time. That is detrimental to whether this person moves forward or gets an offer. So, yeah, the primary decision maker, who makes the final decision, absolutely. You could even ask, how influential is each individual in the interview process going to be to that final decision, and asking that, of course, of the hiring manager to get a better gauge.
Are there must-haves in job descriptions? Are there really must-haves? And, is there wiggle room? How do you actually determine this? And especially, I'm actually talking in reference to passive job seekers.
Yeah, I'm gonna try and push the envelope in that circumstance by maybe presenting hypothetical persons. And I think a lot of times recruiters take a job description as being absolute gospel or a background requirement, and they say, well, this says 5 to 7 years of Java. My guy only has 4. But come on, I mean, can some have we met people who can learn in 3 to 5 years what might take someone 5 to 7 years to learn? So I might say, okay, so what you're telling me is you need 3 to 5 years of this, 2 to 5 years of that, and you would need someone with experience on X, Y, and Z platforms and doing this particular process. So now I'm going to say I'm going to vet somebody who has almost all of that, but is missing 1 or 2. Now, do you mean I should not present this candidate, or So I'm asking for flexibility. Where what are the absolutes, and where do you have some wiggle room, especially in cases where personality plays into this a lot too. It's like, you're asking for an absolute, but then you find out they end up hiring somebody later who looks nothing like the requirement, and you ask them why, and it's well, he just really fit in here. I mean, we both went to the same college and we have the same hobbies, or someone might be a quote unquote natural, whether that's a developer or a sales related position, somebody who just kind of, hey, I know I don't have everything you need, but I can learn it faster, and I'd rather have the natural in the position. So if I can push those a little bit and come up with examples of who I would and who I wouldn't submit, I just think it's important that we want to be screening in at this point and allow them as many options as possible, and find out which of these are ideal and which of these are absolute.
Wow, Mark, you almost sound like a technical recruiter. I thought you were a sales recruiter. I'm surprised you didn't use that as an example. That being said, I agree with Mark. Really, the must-haves will come down to trade-offs. If they have more of this and less of that, or they don't have any of this, but they're that much stronger on that, or if their personality, happens to be, a rock star personality, at least as a fit for the organization, but maybe they have 2 years instead of 5 years. Would you want to hear about somebody like that? And that's one of the key phrases I use. Would you want to hear about somebody like this? And the like this part is something that's a variation, and possibly an extreme variation of the job description that they either wrote up or mapped out for us when we were in discussion. And in some cases, what happens in approaching that conversation that way, actually what often happens is they'll come back, well, no, I wouldn't consider that, but I'd consider this instead. And they may give alternatives to what maybe you even thought of as sample alternatives. It goes to again uncovering the must-haves, the not so must-haves and getting much more clarity of the in-between information about the job description?
In my experience, the real must-haves are the ones that are sort of imposed by HR and company policies. So almost things like if they have an education requirement that beyond a certain position, a person must have a college degree. And that really becomes a must-have because it's almost impossible to hire somebody who doesn't have a college degree for those positions. Same thing with immigration requirements. If the company is not willing to sponsor a work visa for someone, then they put it as a hard and fast rule, and it's pretty much impossible to get beyond that. Anything other than that, which is more, I guess, skills related, is usually negotiable. It's usually something that most people doing the hiring will be willing to play around with. Of course, there's certain very niche skills sometimes which are essential. So if there's a specific tool that I'm working with and I'm really hiring only for that tool, then obviously you can't bring me a candidate who's never worked with that tool and tell me, hey, this person can learn. Of course, I mean, they can probably learn, but that's not what I'm looking for. So that would be a must-have. But other than that, it's usually more flexible than that. What I would say from a recruiter perspective, it's probably very important to determine the flexibility or wiggle room up front, because especially in this era of automation, what we have noticed is a lot of good candidates get screened out by systems just because they don't meet the must-have requirements that are put in as filter conditions by recruiters. And to Mark's example, let's say we put 5 years of Java experience as a requirement, somebody has 4. We'll never even get to the stage of negotiating just because every algorithm that a recruiter is using has already filtered that person out. So that's something that actually recruiters should pay attention to upfront and maybe set their conditions, the search conditions, more loosely so that people like that also get through the filters. So
I think we ought to get used to asking the question, why? Why do you seek 5 to 7 years, or why put this particular technology or platform? If the company says, hey, it's because we don't have this expertise in-house or on site, we need this person to bring it, we can't teach it to him, that's an absolute, right? I get that. But I think a lot of times, especially if you have an HR-generated job description, you've got their own non-technical internal people basically trying to cover their own rear ends to putting, I don't want to be embarrassed as an HR person to submit this person who's not going to be right. So I'm going to be asking for every acronym under the sun that I've ever heard the hiring manager use, when it turns out the hiring manager, if you've had 20 minutes to talk to him, would be happy with less than half of that.
And sometimes, I mean, there's some skills marked as must-haves, which are fairly easy for a smart person to learn, especially somebody with a lot of experience in the field. And just because they haven't ever done it in the past, shouldn't rule them out anyway, because and the hiring manager should probably know this in most of these cases, because it's probably a 3-hour training session. And the person would be up to speed on that one thing. And sometimes, and this is a discussion I know I've had in the past, maybe the recruiter who's found that person can offer to pay for that training session. And that would basically cover all the bases. So that's just a suggestion for all the recruiters out there. But it doesn't really matter because these skills are easily learnable. It's probably a mistake putting them in that must-have list in the first place.
Mm.
I agree with that. It really then comes down to the perspective of the hiring manager or the HR person who's coordinating or setting the requirements. If they don't understand the learnability of a particular technology or skill, in such a brief time, and they may not care, and they may require it anyhow. And no amount of education that the recruiter or account manager will do, with the client is going to help them get over that. So part of our determination is, okay, are they educatable, or are they flexible, or do they have a certain level of willingness to take our advice and suggestions, and do they not? And so that will give us a better gauge on qualifying the job search as well.
How about personality traits and personality fit of the candidates with the hiring company? Do you speak to the hiring manager about that, or?
Yeah, I'm going to, for me, it's probably more important. I think it might not be, I'll let John and Debarshi speak about technical roles, but personality and chemistry in their personal presentation in customer facing and especially sales related roles is super critical. I don't even think I can adequately understand that in a phone call. Maybe the hiring manager can speak to, what type of person has been successful here, and, what maybe speaking to cultural aspects of, hey, we're this kind of company, we play hard and work hard, or, we don't hang out together and, we just come in and get the job done. But that's the kind of question that I need to get to, and often by meeting and visiting the client, which, is probably a whole nother podcast topic. But, I need to get the understanding of the personality of the hiring manager so I can understand the personality of the candidate that's going to fit.
I agree. And actually, for the technical positions I work on, I still find that 51% of getting the job is the personality. It's rare that I find a hiring manager that cares less about personality and just wants to focus strictly on skills and capabilities. But usually when that's the case, it might be a short-term contract. Actually, it typically is a short-term contract. They can come in, do the job, get out, be done. So personality is absolutely key. And what do I ask them? What type of person fits well in your team? How would you describe your leadership philosophy or approach? What type of person would be successful in this role? Those are some of the key questions I would typically ask.
From my perspective, see, I think the personality types that fit in with an organization are fairly is more important to fit into the organization than the job role in many cases. But even aside from that, if you're just looking at the interview process itself, I would come back to my earlier point about multiple people interviewing candidates for the same position. It's important that you understand as a recruiter the differences in their perspectives. And because that really becomes important as a person goes through the process, you really need the candidate to not turn any of them off. I mean, it's almost impossible to find somebody who would be an exact match for everyone, but at least they should not be completely anti any one of the or more of the interviewers, so to speak. So yeah, that's really critical from my perspective. And essentially, other than that, each job type has its own, I guess, personality fits. And that's something that has been fairly well researched and quantified. And that's something that we can absolutely work towards, trying to find good matches for specific job types as we move forward. So that's there's obviously people in jobs that are not good fits for their jobs, and that doesn't bode well for either the job or the person in the long run. So it's important as people who are doing the hiring and are facilitating the hiring to be aware of that.
Is it important to find out who the interviewers will be and like how the interviewers' needs different?
I think that's just going back to that. It's I think for me it's a very important question. Who the interviewers are in a majority of cases will determine how the job search goes and the interview process goes, and it's both in terms of the duration, the complexity, and in terms of just the ease with which a good candidate can be processed through the system. The people who are part of the process can cause or introduce delays which inordinately more than what would be the norm for most of these processes. They can also hold things up just because they don't like a particular candidate. As I just mentioned, they could have different personality profiles. So it's very important to know the people in the process and to prepare candidates accordingly.
Yeah, especially, like let's use a specific instance. Let's say you're a product manager and you're on the final interview and you're going to meet somebody in development, you're going to meet somebody in marketing, you're going to meet somebody in sales. Each of those stakeholders are going to have their own agenda and their own needs. If I'm a marketing person, I might be interested in, how well this person can translate the requirements and features of the role into marketing language. If I'm a salesperson, I'm interested in how well are you going to support me in the process. If I'm a developer, I'm interested in how technical that person is. So not only is it help us, an intelligent candidate will strive to get to what is this individual's stake in the process, be able to speak to that, and then if he's a good negotiator, he might even be able to ask, "Hey, do I have your vote for this position? Do I fit what you need?" And use that opportunity to address any concerns that he has. So that he comes away with, the thumbs up from the whole team.
From my perspective, it's absolutely key to determine who the interviewers are and what their stake is in the decision-making process. At the very least, to understand it so we can help navigate our candidates through the process, but especially to prepare candidates for every interview that they go out on. We should be able to have talking points on each individual, what types of questions they may ask, what type of experience they have, what's their kind of impact on the overall situation to kind of help, especially our non-sales candidates, be able to navigate the process. They're not professional interviewers. They're not professional salespeople. So any kind of intel we can provide them to help them be more comfortable going into an interview, be more prepared, and those insights will be absolutely key for their effectiveness in the interview process. And of course, when they're effective, they make us look effective. So it's definitely cliche, but win-win situation.
How important is it to understand the key initiatives and tasks, whether it be short-term, long-term, that the person will work on? And, what is the impact to the company if no one's hired? What happens if the wrong person is hired too?
Yeah, I spoke to that question earlier in terms of just, that's part of what I want to know to understand how critical the role is and what are the circumstances in helping find the right person. The message I always get from initiatives is that, people tend to hire short-term solutions to their problems, right? So if my candidate is going in either aware of or able to glean that information in terms of what needs to happen to these for each of the stakeholders in this process, how can I help solve their problems and get there quickly? If he can get to that and provide a solution to that, he'll be the guy that gets the offer.
And quite frankly, the key initiatives, the short-term, long-term, tasks, those are absolutely key talking points and expectations to lay out to the candidates. If the candidate doesn't want that those tasks, whether it's short-term or long-term, and that's not really what they want to do, then we're not going to present them. But they also, so in providing or gathering that information, delivering it to being able to have it on hand to deliver to the candidates, it's going to help us not just qualify them, but get them excited about the job. They'll understand better what their career growth opportunities there, and of course, their initial and again long-term impact to the organization. Oftentimes, when you're talking with some of these better candidates, they want to go to a place not just that they're getting paid well, that they can have a positive impact in an exciting environment that has longer term potential, and quite frankly, they'll have fun. So, if the role and responsibilities, or and that information is gathered by us and relayed effectively by us to them, it's going to help build that momentum from conversation one with the candidates.
I think it is obviously very important in an interview when a candidate actually shows up, if they know more than what the skills that they are expected to be working on. if they actually know about the project and the tasks that we are actually working on and the applications that we're working on, then that gives me a comfort level that they will get up to speed and be productive much faster. So if the recruiter has filled them in on our initiatives and the actual applications or whatever the sites or the apps that we're working on, and they can talk to those and basically maybe even comment on those or give us feedback on those, whatever, and maybe talk about some of the technical challenges that they foresee or they can that they can project based on their knowledge of the systems. That's a tremendous plus point in any interview. So to John's point, if he as a recruiter can prep the candidate with that information, that would be awesome. And so it's important for John to first find out what those initiatives are, not just from conversations with me, but even just doing general searches on the internet about the company and seeing what are the different things they're working on, right? And what are the kinds of systems they have? Do they have a SAP ERP system or an Oracle ERP system? And if even if you're hiring a Java programmer, knowing that you have to integrate with one of these systems is a fairly important thing that you could bring up in an interview and talk about your prior experience, maybe with when you were working with these unrelated systems to your job.
All right, let's get into our next segment, our recruiter's favorite tools. So what is our favorite tool for today, Dabarshi?
I can talk about something I've been using. It's a tool called Crystal Knows. It's actually a Google Chrome extension. And what it does is, if you actually use Crystal Knows on a LinkedIn profile, it scrapes the LinkedIn profile data and gives you a personality assessment of the person based on, again, the words that they have written up in their LinkedIn profile. It's very similar to what we do in Applicant, where we are actually deriving a personality assessment of a candidate based on the words they speak in an interview. But you can essentially do the same thing on a LinkedIn profile. So when you're reaching out to a person and maybe having a conversation with a person, you can get a very high level but still pertinent personality profile of that person. So you know how to approach that meeting, or you have at least some pointers on how to approach that meeting. I found this very interesting at the very least, but also useful in certain instances where it's actually warned me about the personality of a person before I've potentially stepped into some hot water. So again, it's called Crystal Knows, and you can download it on Google Chrome.
Cool.
Yeah, cool. My eyes kind of lit up when you talked about what it, when you described it. I thought it was kind of cool.
Yeah. So again, I would point out that this is not me really endorsing the product because, since I work with artificial intelligence and natural language processing a lot, I would just put in a warning sign, a big warning sign that these tools can only be as effective as the content that they're analyzing. And as we all know, LinkedIn profiles are not necessarily written by the person themselves. So it's very likely that it's analyzing words written by somebody else.
Oh, especially in a case where the company's content from the website is consistent with every profile under their employer. Yeah, I get that.
Exactly. So it's really then in that case analyzing the person who actually wrote that profile and not the person. So we'll always have to take this kind of analysis with a grain of salt. So the actual benefit of it will only come through, I guess, usage and figuring out how it works.
So that's a new product to me. Actually sounds really cool. I got to admit, when I wrote down Crystal Knows, I wrote it down wrong. So when I went and searched the site as we're talking here, it's Crystal knows.com.
Right.
Again, may not be endorsing it, but that's where you go to get the solution. So yeah, I'm going to have to check that out as well.
Oh, as opposed to like a glass nose.
Yeah, I know.
Gotcha.
All right, let's wrap up with some key, I guess we'll call them hidden secrets about taking the job order, secrets in the job description. So let's hit off with John. Maybe you want to give us one key insight, one big secret to wrap up.
For me, big secret, it really is about building the relationship. Yeah, it's as I've said before, past, present, future. Why is this open? What's what leads up to today? What have you done so far? What are the key elements of what you need to get done, or the key initiatives, short term and long term, and what's the longer term potential for the candidate? So, what are the sweet spots of skills and capabilities, along with kind of the pitch about the job and the organization that's going to get the right person excited.
Yeah, I'm a full desk guy, and I'm talking to agency guys. They'll know what that means. That means I've got to do my own biz dev, and I fill my own positions. And as humdrum as the topic, taking the job order might be, really, this is the magic, in making your decisions. Because even if you're a dedicated recruiter in an agency, you've still got some impact on what you choose to work on, right? And so if you can get to the essence of, let's not put our heads in the sand. If I've got a B job and, 2 C jobs to work on, I want to be working on A jobs. This is where we make our money. I need to know that this is going to be fillable and that this is I'll be successful with it. So, it's all of these things that we're talking about today, are critical toward getting at how much of my time do I want to spend on this, and what are my priorities, and not deceiving myself that I've got something that's worthwhile just because it happens to be a job open, as opposed to one I might have to do a little more work to go find and get. That little more work might be that much more successful in getting me something I can complete and fill and get paid on.
And for me, I would just emphasize the point that it's not just one person or the one person who you're in contact with making the decision. There's a number of people involved in any hiring process, and it's important that a recruiter takes into account the entire gamut of that group. Basically, they have each have their own personalities and each have a separate set of things that they're looking for. So when you're taking the job order, make sure you take into account all of that and not just what's written in the job description and what the one person you're talking to is telling you.
All right. Well, thanks for listening in. If you have any comments or suggestions for the topics that you want us to discuss in the future, reach out to us via email at interview@inamics.com or on Twitter. So we'll be back soon with more content and suggestions about how to make your staffing operations simpler and more efficient.